Okay, so today we're working with really sharp things. Hey class, Mr. G here, going over today's project. Today's project that we're going to do is the 3D paper cut. Hey class, Mr. G here, going over today's assignment. Today's assignment's a 3D paper cut that I was working on with my class. So today's topic, let's go over some of the basic things that you guys need to know about today. Number one, you guys are using some really sharp X-Acto knives. Make sure you guys are careful when you're working with these. My rule of thumb is when you're cutting, make sure that the hand that's holding down the page is in front of you, preferably with your thumb tucked. Make sure that you don't nick yourself on accident, and the back of the blade, which is this part up here, not the cutting edge, is pointed towards that hand. That way, if you accidentally slip, the slip doesn't, your hand will twist and it won't, the hand that's holding the knife, and it won't cut your other hand as well. So that way you're double secure in making sure that you're not going to get cut. So for this paper cut piece, I was going through Pinterest and saw a number of really cool projects, and I thought this is super awesome. I would love to do this project in my class. So how can we do this in my class? When I started looking at the different designs, different pieces that they were doing, I've broke it down to very simple instructions for my class. And this is the instructions that I'm going to use with you guys as well. Now, I often don't make a lot of handouts. However, for this project, I thought it was quite imperative to make some handouts. Number one is I used a storyboard worksheet that I got offline, and in each of the cells, I'm having my students break down their image that they're going to draw. So on the back of the page, you're going to draw your one image that you're going to put down into your entire scene. And on the front side, we're going to break that down into the foreground, middle ground, and background. Now, I have having my students do between 5 and 7 different panels. So you're going to need extra pages if you're exceeding this. But I do recommend doing at least that many, just because then it gives a proper definition of space inside of your illustration. That's what we're wanting to do here. So the elements that we're working on texture, we're working on space, and working on line. Now for the principles though, we're dealing with repetition, because the marks, the lines that you're going to be cutting, you're dealing with repetition of line and how you're going to be cutting those things out. And you're just using those repetitions, you're using those lines, you're using that form, that structure, space to help create those images. It's really cool stuff. Once you have your designs laid out on this page, then we can go to a tracing board. Now what I had my students do is we use some manila paper and a tracer, just a nice stack of that manila paper, and then I cut out a tracing square. Now this square is the space that they're going to work in on their piece. So by working in a set measured space, then all the pieces will all be the same. They'll all kind of line up together. Now I have a light table to where we can see the images as you're stacking those papers up, to make sure that you're not laying a line over another line, so that you can easily see the dimension in the space in the piece that you're creating. So once you've drawn out your tracer block on several pieces of manila paper, then you can start transferring down your images from one cell here to the paper on here. You're taking your image that you broke down on the back page, you're going to then break it down into the foreground, the middle ground, the background on this page, and then you're going to copy that design from here onto your sheets of manila paper. So again, you're using about 5 to 7 sheets of manila paper. Just a suggestion, I recommend the manila paper over, or if you can, get some cardstock, because the thicker paper holds up a lot better, especially when you're using the X-Acto knife, and it works to making a much cleaner cut, because the thinner the paper that you use, the more delicate the paper is, the more likely it is to tear as you're going to cut it. No matter how sharp that blade is, it's going to just tear just because of the pulling nature that you're having to do. Make sure that you use a thicker piece of paper to create those designs on. Now, before my students get into the design cutting aspect, they're going to do a couple worksheets to pre-test how they cut. Now again, this is on copy paper, so this is going to be a lot more difficult than when they cut on there. So if they can master this, they can master that a lot easier, and that's the piece that I really care about, the cutting aspect, so they understand how to use the blade, how the blade works, how to go through a twist, how to go through a bend. That is what these test papers are for. Now before we start those projects, one of those things that also helps for students to understand how space is relative into this design, I made several copies of jack-o'-lantern Halloween stencils, and they had to create some designs so they understand the positive space and the negative space. So when they're subtracting the design out of the paper, they understand that what is going to be left and what's going to be seen. That way you can understand, as you're breaking down the individual scene, you can create, you can see. Now coming up, we're going to be watching a quick tutorial on me going through the process of actually cutting this out and then stacking the pieces together. So check that out so that you guys can see the start to finish application. All right, so making this thing, make sure that one, you have a good sharp X-Acto knife. Make sure that you're working on top of a board. Notice how in that video that you just watched me do, I had a cutting board surface that I had, and I also had some extra scrap mat board that I put on top of there as well. You want to make sure that as you're cutting on top of an additional surface, so that as that blade goes through the paper, it doesn't touch this mason top that I have the table here, because as soon as the blade touches it, it will start to chip, and if the blade chips, the chip could go into your skin, and that would be a problem, just because then you'd be cut. Make sure that you're cutting into a surface. I've used scrap cardboard in the past. I have those cutting boards now. Additional scraps of mat board. Don't use paper just because it cuts through like butter. Just if you need something to break it by, again, cardboard, mat board, or it's like a mason. It's not a mason, it's a cardboard kind of board thing. It's hard to describe. Taking those as your precautionary steps, that should help you create these awesome pieces. And as always, let's go ahead and wrap it up like we usually do. Homework for you guys for the class is like, share, subscribe on all the various platforms so you guys can take care of that. Spread the message out, get the community rolling. If at all you guys have a question, don't forget to raise your hand down in the comments below, and I'll be happy to answer those questions. And until next time, I'll see you guys next class. Later, guys.